I knew the trip was a gamble. After a year of working remote, burning out and ghosting every friend who tried to pull me out of my rut, I figured a group tour through Spain would jolt me back to life. Something about being in a new place, with new people, doing the kind of basic touristy stuff I used to roll my eyes at. It sounded healing, or at least distracting. What I didn't expect was to walk into the hotel lobby in Barcelona and see him. Micah. My ex. The one person on this planet I wasn't prepared to see while holding a laminated tour badge around my neck and dragging a busted carry-on behind me. He looked the same. Better, actually. That's the worst part. Hair still messy in that careless but it works way. Tanned. Leaner. Wearing this faded blue tee that I recognized, one I'd used to sleep in. He looked up from his phone and froze. I tried to look unfazed. Tried. Failed. Micah? I said, like I wasn't sure. Like I didn't already feel my stomach drop through the floor. He blinked. Shit. Evan? That was it. No hug, no smile, just shit. We hadn't spoken in almost 9 months. Not since that brutal conversation in my apartment, where we both said things we couldn't take back. And now here he was, standing in front of me on the exact same group tour. 20 strangers about to become friends. And somehow this was happening. Before I could wrap my head around it, the tour guide, bright-eyed and way too chipper for a jet-lagged crowd, called out, "Okay, everyone, welcome to the first night of your Iberian adventure. Quick housekeeping note before dinner. Tonight, we've paired roommates based on your registration preferences, but tomorrow, you're free to swap if needed." I didn't even react until I heard her call it out. Room 315, Evan and Micah. My heart stopped. I turned. Micah turned. And we both said, at the same time, "Nope, that's not happening." The guide laughed like we were joking. You two already know each other? Cute. Micah ran a hand over his face. You've got to be kidding me. Can we switch? I asked, stepping forward. Literally anyone else, she frowned, checking her clipboard. The hotel's full tonight, I'm afraid. If there are any issues, let me know in the morning and we'll do our best. Just one night. Yeah, just one night. Famous last words. I followed Micah silently to the elevator, both of us too stunned to talk. When the doors closed, we stood side by side, the silence thick and weirdly loud. He glanced over. Of all the tours in all the cities. Don't, I muttered. He didn't. We stepped into room 315, and it was exactly what I feared. One room. One queen bed. A bathroom that might as well have been a closet. Micah dropped his bag. Okay, we need a plan. I crossed my arms. You take the bed, I'll take the chair. Come on, it's not that serious. I laughed. Really? You want to share a bed with me after how we ended? Micah didn't answer right away. He just sat on the edge of the bed, rubbing the back of his neck. Look, it's one night. Let's not make it a thing. It is a thing, I snapped. We're exes, Micah, not buddies who lost touch. He looked up, eyes tired. You think I wanted this? You think I'm thrilled about sharing a room with the guy who told me I was impossible to love? That hit harder than I expected. I didn't reply, just grabbed my bag, found a clean shirt, and locked myself in the bathroom under the pretense of showering. Really, I just needed 5 minutes to breathe. Or maybe cry. I hadn't planned on facing Micah again. Not like this. Not while trapped in a tiny hotel room in a foreign country with no escape and no space to hide. But there we were. And the worst part? I wasn't sure how much of me was still angry and how much still missed him. I stayed in the bathroom longer than I needed to, not because I was still mad. Okay, maybe a little. But because I didn't know how to exist in that room with Micah yet. It felt like being forced to sit next to an open wound and trying not to flinch. When I finally came out, he was lying on the bed, scrolling through his phone like none of this was weird. He'd changed into a tank top and shorts, the same pair I used to steal from his drawer after closeness, because they were way more comfortable than mine. He didn't look up. Just said, Bathroom's all yours." I grabbed a water bottle from the nightstand and sat in the chair near the window. It creaked under my weight, too small for a grown man to sleep in, let alone one dealing with jet lag and unresolved emotional trauma. "Look," he said after a long pause. "If it makes you feel better, I'll sleep on the floor." I looked at him. "And I'll sleep where, exactly? In the sink?" He cracked a tired smile. "You always were dramatic. And you always knew how to make a situation worse." I shot back, before I could stop myself. He flinched. Just a little. Then his eyes flicked toward me. "You really want to do this now?" "No," I muttered. I didn't. But the thing about being trapped in a room with someone you used to love is you're always 3 breaths away from bringing it all back up. Especially when the room is silent. Especially when the past is still echoing off the walls like it never left. He laid back, staring at the ceiling. "How have you been?" I laughed once, a bitter sound. "Really? You want small talk?" "I want to know if you're okay." That made me pause. Because the truth was, I wasn't sure. The breakup hadn't destroyed me, but it hadn't exactly left me better. I'd gone through the usual routine, cutting him off social media, deleting his number, though I still remembered it. Throwing out the hoodie, I said I was keeping just until laundry day. But moving on hadn't felt like moving forward. It just felt like moving around the crater he left behind. "I've been fine," I said, which was a lie. "You?" He shrugged. "Busy, work's been nuts, got promoted last month." Of course he did. Micah always landed on his feet. Even when we were together, I used to marvel at how he never stumbled. Not really. I was the one who second-guessed every decision. While he could book flights on a whim and somehow always get upgraded to first class. "Good for you," I said flatly. We didn't say anything for a while after that. I tried to focus on my phone, but nothing could distract me from the fact that I could feel him in the room. His presence. The weight of it. When I finally looked over, he was turned on his side, facing away from me. "You snore?" I asked. He huffed a laugh. "Only when I'm anxious." "So, all night then." He reached over and turned off the bedside lamp, throwing the room into darkness. "You sure you're okay?" he asked, his voice softer now, like he wasn't sure if I was still listening. "I don't know," I said, and I meant it. Sleep didn't come easy. The chair was awful. Too upright. The cushion was practically non-existent, and the armrest dug into my sides every time I shifted. I tried curling up, then lying on the floor. At one point, I even debated dragging the duvet into the hallway and crashing there. Around 2 a.m., Micah's voice floated out of the dark. "Evan." I didn't answer right away. "You awake?" "Obviously." He exhaled, then said, "Just sleep in the bed, man." I sat up. "You serious?" "You're not sleeping. I'm not either. The chair's killing you, and I don't bite." "Not what you used to say," I muttered. He was quiet for a second then. "I mean it. Just take one side." Against my better judgment, and probably everything my therapist would have advised, I stood up and padded over to the bed. We didn't touch, didn't face each other. Just lay there, a solid foot of mattress between us, facing opposite walls like strangers with too much history. But that silence, it was different now. Not as sharp, not as loaded, more tentative, like we were both waiting to see what version of ourselves would show up in the morning. Waking up next to Micah felt wrong, not because anything happened, not because we touched, just because it was familiar, and familiar was dangerous. I woke up with my back still to him, the sunlight pressing through the thin hotel curtains. The mattress was warm under me, but it wasn't mine. The silence in the room had shifted again, less tense, more cautious. Micah stirred behind me. I could hear him shift under the covers, that faint rustle of sheets I used to wake up to on Sunday mornings, back when we'd still sleep in, just to stay tangled up in each other. I sat up slowly, careful not to shake the bed too much. My body ached from how rigid I'd been all night. Still, better than that chair." Micah's voice was groggy. "You awake?" "Yeah." He yawned, still lying down, eyes half closed. "You always wake up this early?" "Only when I'm stressed." "Ah," he said, like he got it. And maybe he did. That was the problem with exes. They know where the sore spots are, even if they're not allowed to touch them anymore. I swung my legs out of bed and grabbed my clothes. "I'll shower first," he nodded, rubbing his eyes. "Take your time." The bathroom was small and filled with the kind of awkward humidity that only hotel showers could produce. As the water ran, I leaned on the sink and stared at myself in the mirror. My hair was a mess, my eyes slightly puffy, and my expression looked more tired than it should have. There was a moment, just a second, where I thought about texting Mark and asking to switch roommates, but that felt dramatic, childish even. I wasn't going to let Micah being here ruin my trip. At least, that's what I told myself. When I came out, wrapped in a towel, Micah was still in bed, flipping through the tour itinerary like he was planning brunch. "You know," he said without looking up, "we've got a whole city outside this room." "Shocking," I replied, drying my hair with a hand towel. "I mean it. Don't let this," he gestured vaguely between us, "make the whole trip weird." "Too late," I muttered. Micah sat up. "It doesn't have to be. We can be civil, friends even." I looked at him. "You think we're friends?" "I think we were friends before we became something else. And then we ruined it." He didn't argue. Just looked at me with this quiet, thoughtful expression like he was trying to figure out how much of me was still the same. Eventually, we left the room together. Not exactly side by side, but close enough that people probably assumed we were just two travel buddies, dragging ourselves to the hotel breakfast like everyone else. Mark spotted me across the buffet line. "Dude, I didn't know you knew Micah. I grabbed a banana just to have something to do with my hands." "Yeah, we, used to date." Mark blinked. "Oh, like date? "Yeah." He whistled low. "That's awkward. You have no idea." Micah had joined a small cluster of people near the espresso machine. He was already smiling, charming strangers the way he used to charm waiters and my coworkers and, well, me. Watching him slip so easily into social mode reminded me of all the times I used to rely on him to do exactly that. God, it was annoying how good he was at being liked. The group was headed to La Sagrada Familia that morning, followed by a food tour through the Gothic Quarter. Plenty of walking. Plenty of distractions. I figured that would help. It did. For a while, the city was beautiful, the kind that slaps you in the face with old-world charm and modern chaos all at once. Cobbled streets, little alleys that smelled like espresso and cigarettes, sunlight bouncing off balconies strung with laundry. I let myself sink into it. Took photos. Laughed with Mark and a few of the others. Even forgot Micah was there a few times. But every now and then, I'd catch him watching me. Not like before. Not possessive. Not longing. Just watching. Like he was studying me in real time, trying to map the changes in me since we split. I hated how aware I was of it, how part of me wanted to turn and ask what he saw. By the time we returned to the hotel that evening, I was wiped. I dropped my bag on the chair, kicked off my sneakers, and collapsed onto the bed. Micah came in a few minutes later, carrying a Coke and a bag of those weird paprika chips they only sell in Europe. He tossed the bag on the bed between us. "True snack?" I stared at it. "You still eat these?" "They're good." "They taste like regret," he snorted. Fitting. I reached for the bag anyway. We sat there, side by side on the bed, not touching, barely speaking, watching some random Spanish game show with the volume low. The silence was almost comfortable. Almost. "Can I ask you something?" he said finally. I didn't look at him. "Sure. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if we'd handled things differently?" I froze, not because I didn't have an answer, but because I did, all the time. But instead I said, "What's the point?" He nodded slowly, like he understood. "Yeah, I guess you're right. And that was the end of that conversation. But it wasn't the end of whatever was building between us again. Not even close. By the third day, we'd settled into a rhythm. Not a comfortable one, but a rhythm nonetheless. Mornings were awkward. Always. We'd get dressed facing away from each other like two guys at a locker room trying not to make eye contact. He'd brush his teeth while I checked my messages. I'd shower while he scrolled through tour updates. We kept it light, safe, no questions that would veer too close to the past. No late-night confessions or emotional landmines. On paper, it worked. But reality? Reality was something else. I could feel him in the room even when he wasn't saying anything. The way he moved. The way he'd glance at me in the mirror when I wasn't looking. Like he wanted to say something but couldn't find a version of it that wouldn't explode in his face. I was no better. Every time we brushed past each other, at the sink, the closet, the bed, it sent this stupid jolt through me. Like my body still remembered him, even though my brain was screaming for space. It was the kind of thing that made me feel like I hadn't moved on at all, just buried the whole mess deep enough to pretend I had. That afternoon, the group took a train out to Montserrat. The views were stunning, all jagged cliffs and distant hills and wild sun. But the real highlight was the hike up to the monastery. Micah ended up walking beside me. I didn't plan it. Neither did he, I think. We just ended up there. "How's the chair treating you?" he asked after a mile or so of silence. I shot him a look. "You're the one who keeps hogging the bed." He grinned, the corners of his mouth twitching in that way that used to kill me. "Hey, I offered the floor." "You're tall. Your back would never survive." "True," he said, stretching his arms above his head as he walked, the hem of his shirt rising just slightly to expose the line of his waist. "So generous of you to sacrifice your spine instead. I'm a giver." He laughed. I didn't mean to, but I smiled. For a moment, it felt easy again. We stopped at a lookout point halfway up, most of the group ahead, or lagging behind. The wind was sharp there, carrying the sound of birds and faraway bells. The view stretched for miles, like something out of a postcard. Micah stood beside me looking out. "God, it's gorgeous." "Yeah," I said. "It is." He turned, just slightly. "I forgot how much you love this kind of thing. Solitude and scenic cliffs?" He chuckled. "That too. But no. I mean places. You used to be the guy who had 3 travel Pinterest boards." I raised an eyebrow. "You remember that?" He didn't answer right away, just kept staring at the horizon. "I remember a lot." The way he said it, it hit different. I turned away, suddenly aware of how close we were standing. My pulse kicked up. "Micah!" I started, but he cut me off gently. "I know, not the time." We finished the hike mostly in silence, but not the uncomfortable kind. It was almost worse, the kind that felt too familiar, too easy, like muscle memory kicking in. And it scared me. That night, back at the hotel, the room felt smaller than ever. I was brushing my teeth when he leaned against the doorframe and watched me in the mirror. "You still do that thing," he said. I frowned, mouth full of foam. "What thing?" "You hum when you brush." I blinked, hadn't even realized I was doing it. "I used to hear it through the bathroom door, back at the apartment." I spat and wiped my mouth. "You remembering stuff like that isn't helping." "I'm not trying to help," he said quietly. "I'm just noticing." I stepped past him, went to the bed, pulled the covers back. He watched me the whole time. "You want to talk?" I asked, without looking at him. Micah crossed the room, sat down on the edge of the bed. "I think we are. No, I mean really talk." He hesitated, then nodded, like he knew we'd hit the point where pretending we were just 2 guys forced to share a room was no longer cutting it. "I've thought about you," he said softly. I didn't respond. Not every day, but often. Still, I said nothing. He exhaled. "Look, I know I messed up." We both did. I cut in. Let's not rewrite history. Fair. But I was the one who bailed first. I looked at him then. You left because you couldn't deal with the hard stuff, the actual work of being with someone who's complicated. You're not complicated, he said. You just needed more than I knew how to give. That landed heavier than I expected. We sat there, side by side on the bed, not touching, not even looking at each other anymore. Micah ran a hand through his hair. I don't know why we ended up here, in the same city, same group, same room, but maybe there's a reason. There's not, I said automatically. But a part of me, the part that still missed the way his hand felt resting on my leg during long drives, or how he'd steal the blanket at 3 a.m. That part didn't sound so sure. I turned out the lamp, rolled away from him, and in the dark he whispered, "Still, I'm glad I saw you again." I didn't reply, but I didn't move away either. The next morning, something had shifted. We didn't talk about the conversation we had the night before, not with words, but I could feel it, like the air in the room had been charged and no one remembered flipping the switch. Micah woke before me. I heard the shower running and stayed in bed, eyes open, staring at the ceiling while his voice hummed low behind the door. Some song he probably didn't even realize he was singing. When he came out, towels slung low around his hips, steam following him like a halo, he looked over at me and paused. "Morning," he said, voice soft. I nodded, sitting up. "You're up early. Didn't sleep much." Neither did I, but I didn't say it. We took turns getting ready, still falling into that strange, quiet rhythm that felt too natural for two people who'd once screamed at each other in a parking garage and gone no contact for nearly a year. The tour that day took us down the coast, sitches, beaches, small cafes, a boat ride at sunset. The kind of thing that would have made us nauseatingly coupley if we'd still been together. I could practically see the ghost version of us sitting 2 rows ahead, laughing over shared tapas and taking ridiculous selfies in front of the water. That version of us had died somewhere between a missed anniversary and my inability to say what I really needed until it was too late. And yet now, Micah kept gravitating toward me. He wasn't being pushy, wasn't clinging, but he'd walk beside me instead of ahead, ask me if I wanted a drink, point out things he knew I'd like. At one point he nudged me gently and said, "That artist looks like someone you'd follow." It was nothing, but also too much. I didn't know how to act. Every time I tried to keep my distance, he'd smile like he remembered things I'd forgotten how to feel. And it made me resent how easily he was slipping under my skin again. That night, dinner was optional, and most of the group split off. Mark went out drinking with a few others. I wasn't in the mood. I grabbed a sandwich from the hotel cafe and brought it back to the room. Micah came in not long after. He closed the door gently, like he wasn't sure what version of me he'd find on the other side. "I thought you went out," I said, not looking up from my phone. "Was going to. But it felt weird." I raised an eyebrow. "The bar?" "No. Being out without you." That stopped me. I set my phone down, slowly. "Micah, I know," he said quickly. "I'm not trying to start anything. I just can't keep pretending we're strangers." I looked at him, at his stupid soft hoodie and damp curls, and the scar on his jaw from the time he tripped carrying groceries up our old apartment stairs. "I'm not pretending," I said. He sat down across from me. "Then what are you doing?" I swallowed. "Surviving." He didn't say anything to that, just nodded like it hurt to hear, but he understood anyway. After a long pause, he asked, "Did you hate me? After?" "I tried to," I admitted. "For a while." "And now?" I hesitated. "Now I don't know what I feel. And that's almost worse." He leaned back on the bed, looking up at the ceiling like it might have the answers neither of us could say out loud. "I didn't stop caring," he said. "Even after we stopped talking. I thought I could. But I'd hear a song or see something on TV and it'd wreck me." I sat there, sandwich untouched, watching him as he spoke like it physically hurt to get the words out. "I wanted to text you 100 times," he said, "but I figured you didn't want to hear from me." "I didn't," I said honestly. Not at first. He looked over at me, something in his eyes shifting. But now? I didn't answer right away. Instead, I got up and walked to the window. The city buzzed below, all warm light and distant sound. Tourists stumbling back from dinner, taxis slicing through intersections. I don't know, Micah, I said quietly. You hurt me. Not just the breakup, but how you shut down. How you walked out like we weren't worth the work. He stood behind me, not close, but near enough that I could feel him in that same way I always did, like heat behind glass. I was scared, he said, and selfish. I kept thinking if I just ignored the cracks, they'd fix themselves. You used to be the one who told me relationships took effort. Yeah. I just didn't realize how much until it was too late. We stood there in silence, the kind that felt like it was asking for something more. Like it was waiting to see what would happen next. He stepped closer. You want me to stop? He asked. I didn't move. He took that as a no. His hand hovered near mine, not touching, just waiting. I don't know what this is, I said, barely above a whisper. Me either, he replied. But I'm scared of whatever it is, I added. Same. And somehow, that felt more honest than any of the promises we'd made when we were still together. Eventually, we sat back down. We didn't talk much after that. The TV played some random show in the background while we lay on our separate sides of the bed. But this time, the silence didn't feel like space between us. It felt like a bridge. And I wasn't sure if I wanted to cross it, or if I already had. By the 5th day of the tour, it was obvious. People were starting to notice. Not that we were together. We weren't. Not really. But you don't spend that much time sitting next to someone on the bus, walking a little too close, or quietly arguing in a corner without raising a few eyebrows. At breakfast, one of the girls in our group, Claire, leaned toward me and said, So, are you and Micah? Like, a thing? I nearly choked on my orange juice. What? No. She tilted her head. Really? Because you two have that weird tension thing going on. Mark, who had just sat down with his coffee, looked up. Oh, that's what that is. I thought they just hated each other. We don't hate each other, I muttered, stabbing at my eggs. Claire shrugged. Whatever it is, it's loud. And they weren't wrong. Micah and I hadn't had another serious conversation since the night we stood by the window, but the weight of it still lingered. It followed us into the next city like a second suitcase, one neither of us wanted to unpack, but both of us kept tripping over. The bus ride to Valencia was long, hot, quiet in that weird midday way where everyone's either asleep or zoned out with headphones. I sat by the window. Micah slid in next to me like it was already decided. I didn't stop him. For the first hour, we didn't talk. I watched the scenery blur past, olive groves, winding roads, low hills under a wide sky. Then Micah said, Do you remember that road trip we took to Maine? I glanced over. The one where you got food poisoning from that roadside clam shack? He grinned. Hey, that chowder smelled legit. It was gray, authentic, expired. We both laughed, and for a second, it didn't feel complicated. Just two people who'd shared a weird, funny weekend and lived to tell the tale. Micah looked at me a little longer than necessary. I miss stuff like that. Me too, I said quietly. Then I added, but missing it doesn't mean it still works. He leaned his head against the seat, facing forward again. I know. The hotel in Valencia was better, newer, 2 twin beds. When we walked into the room and saw them, Micah let out a dramatic sigh. Look at that. Growth, I smirked. Guess the universe got tired of watching us almost touch. Speak for yourself, he said, but his smile didn't reach his eyes. That night, after tapas and wine with the group, I came back to the room before him. I kicked off my shoes, pulled off my shirt, and flopped down onto my bed. I should have gone to sleep. I should have scrolled TikTok until I passed out, or read a chapter of my book, or done literally anything else but lie there thinking about him, about how careful he'd been around me, about how he kept glancing at me like he wasn't sure if he was allowed to want something again. The door opened. Micah came in, quiet. He didn't say much, just toed off his sneakers and peeled off his shirt. I tried not to look, but the sight of him always stirred something I didn't want to name. "Can I ask you something?" he said after a moment. "Sure. If you had the chance to redo it us, would you?" I turned toward him, but he wasn't looking at me, just sitting on the edge of his bed, elbows on his knees, staring at the floor. "I don't know," I admitted. "Maybe, but I don't know if we'd get it right. What if we were better now?" "Are we?" He looked over then. Really looked. "I think I am." "I don't know if I am," I said. And that was the truth. I hadn't dated anyone since Micah. Not seriously. I told myself I was focusing on work, on myself, on recovering, but maybe I'd just been stuck. Maybe part of me had been waiting without realizing it. He stood up, walked to the window, then back again like he couldn't sit still. "I keep thinking about that last night we had," he said. "You were crying in the kitchen and I just shut down. I didn't know what to do with all that pain. I didn't know how to hold it." I swallowed hard. "You didn't have to hold it. You just had to be there." "I know that now." Silence settled over us. Eventually, he sat back down on his bed and leaned back. "I'm not saying we should try again. I think part of me never really stopped being with you, even after it ended." I didn't know what to say to that. I just nodded, rolled onto my side, and turned off my lamp. For a while, the only sound was the faint buzz of the air conditioning and the occasional honk from the street below. Then, quietly in the dark, Micah said, "Good night, Evan." And even though it didn't fix anything, I whispered, "Good night." Because sometimes that's all you can offer someone, even if you wish it were more. By the time we hit Madrid, the last city on the itinerary, I knew I was in trouble. Something had shifted, not just between us, but in me. I'd been holding Micah at arm's length since Barcelona, keeping every moment between us measured, every word chosen with surgical precision. But that wall I built, it was cracking. And the worst part, I wasn't even sure I wanted to fix it. Madrid was louder, busier, more chaotic than the other cities. It matched the noise in my head. Flamenco guitar on street corners, the echo of footsteps in tight alleys, cafe tables jammed with laughing strangers drinking way too much sangria for a Tuesday. It felt alive. And I'd started to feel alive again too. But whether that was the city or Micah, I couldn't say. We had 2 nights left. That was it. The end of the tour felt like a deadline I hadn't planned for. One I didn't know how to meet. That evening, the group went out for one last dinner together. An overpriced restaurant with too many forks and wine that kept magically refilling itself. People were already trading Instagram handles, promising to keep in touch even though half of them wouldn't. Micah sat across from me. We barely talked. But every time someone made a joke, every time someone clinked glasses or passed a dish across the table, we looked at each other. Not with words. Just glances. Glances that said, "What are we doing?" When we got back to the hotel, everyone lingered in the lobby, not quite ready to end it. I slipped away first. I needed a minute. Or 10. The room was dark when I walked in. I didn't turn on the lights. Just kicked off my shoes and sank onto the bed. I heard the door open a few minutes later. Micah came in, paused. "Lights?" "Nah," I said. He left them off. The only glow came from the streetlights filtering in through the window. I heard him sit on his bed. Then, "You okay?" I laughed once, quietly. "That's a complicated question." He didn't push. I rolled over, stared at the ceiling. "You remember our last trip together?" He didn't answer immediately. "Before we broke up?" "Yeah." "The lake house, upstate." "Of course I do," I nodded. "You fell asleep on the dock, and you covered me with a towel and took like 40 photos of me sleeping, because you looked peaceful." I drooled on my shirt. I smiled. "Still peaceful." Micah let out a breath like he'd been holding it for a while. You were the only person who made me feel that way, like I didn't have to prove anything. I sat up, heart suddenly too loud. I never asked you to prove anything, I said. I just wanted you to show up. He looked over at me. I know. You didn't. Not then. He nodded slowly. But I do now. The room felt heavy, dense, like it was about to tip into something we couldn't pull back from. Micah stood, walked to my bed, and sat on the edge like he was waiting for permission to be near me again. I don't know if this is fair, I said, voice low. You showing up like this now? After everything? It's probably not, he admitted. But I didn't plan this, Evan. I didn't come here thinking I'd see you. I didn't expect to want anything. So what do you want? His eyes flicked to mine. You, I exhaled, shaky. Micah. I don't need answers tonight, he said. Or tomorrow. I just need you to know that the person sitting in front of you right now is not the same guy who walked away from you last year. I looked down. At my hands. At the space between us. You think you can undo all that? I asked. He shook his head. No, but I think I can show you something better. For a long time, I didn't speak. And then, without thinking, without planning, I reached out and took his hand. His fingers tightened around mine instantly. Warm, familiar, real. I don't know what this is, I whispered. Me either, he said just as quietly, but it feels honest. We sat there in the dark, holding hands like teenagers, afraid of what would happen if they let go. No promises, no sudden declarations, just two people trying to figure out if there was still something worth saving. And for the first time since this whole trip started, I didn't feel stuck anymore. I felt like maybe, just maybe, I had a choice. Our last full day in Madrid started slow. Neither of us said much in the morning. Not because things were weird, but because they weren't. The silence between us had shifted again, but this time it felt lighter, easier. Like the air had cleared just enough to breathe again. We did the last few tourist stops with the group, the Royal Palace, a market crawl, one final group photo in front of the Prado, where someone made a joke about one last look of suffering. It was corny. It was perfect. Micah and I weren't glued to each other, but we didn't drift either. It was like we'd learned how to orbit again, close enough to feel it, far enough to make space. That evening, the group did one final dinner. Everyone dressed a little nicer, buzzed with the kind of bittersweet energy that comes with knowing you've shared something rare. That in 48 hours, most of these people would go back to their cities, their jobs, their real lives, and half of them would forget your last name. I don't remember much of what we ate, but I remember sitting beside Micah. I remember our legs brushing under the table, just once, and neither of us pulling away. Afterward, most of the group went out drinking again. Some wanted to dance. Some were crying and hugging like it was the end of a reality show. I just wanted to go back to the room. Micah followed without a word. Back in the room, we packed. Our flights were both early. We moved around each other with a kind of strange, gentle coordination, like we didn't want to disturb whatever fragile thing had built itself between us. When I zipped my suitcase closed, I turned and saw him sitting on the edge of his bed watching me. I don't want this to be the end, he said. I sat down on my bed across from him. I don't know what this is, I said, echoing what I'd told him the night before. I don't know if we're rewriting something or starting from scratch. Micah leaned forward. I don't need a label. I just need to keep talking to you. Keep showing up. And if I get scared again? I asked, quieter. Then I'll remind you that I'm not going anywhere this time, he said. And if I get scared, I need you to remind me too. It sounded simple. It wasn't, but there was honesty in that, and it felt like something solid to stand on. He reached over and touched my knee. Not a move. Not a plea. Just a touch. Like a grounding point. I'm flying back to New York, he said. But I'll come see you next weekend, if you want. I nodded, heart thudding. I do, he smiled. You're not going to ghost me, are you? I've shared a bed with you in 3 cities and 1 questionable hostel, I said. You think I'd do all that just to ghost you now? He laughed. It was the kind of laugh that reminded me of Sunday mornings and inside jokes, and that one night in Portland when we slow danced to a song we couldn't remember the name of. Later, after we turned out the lights, I lay awake for a while. Micah's breathing was steady, his back to me, but close. At some point, I'm not sure when, I rolled over and let my hand drift over the space between our beds. I felt his fingers find mine. No words, just that. And somehow, that was everything.